Handheld game systems. Mattel's Auto Race from 1976 is widely considered to be the first handheld game system. 1979, we saw Milton Bradley's Microvision, which was the first to let you swap out games, and after that, several more would come. And go. But today we're going to be chatting about one of the biggest handheld systems of all time. Today, we're going to be talking about the Game Boy. So why are we talking about the Game Boy? Well, mostly because we talk about toys and toy-adjacent stuff, and because I want to. But also because the Nintendo Game Boy revolutionized portable gaming. Released in 1989, it was designed by Gunpei Yokoi. At a time when everyone was kind of pushing for better graphics, the Game Boy decided to do things different. They saw handheld games as a different creature than home systems and believed that kids wanted better battery life, more affordable options, and a killer software library. So, did it work? Well, that's kind of what we're here to talk about. The Nintendo Research and Development 1, R&D 1, is what that's what they call it. This was the team behind the Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong arcade games, as well as Game & Watch. In 1983, Game & Watch was still popular internationally, but sales in Japan were starting to decline. So R&D 1 figured it might be time to create something new. Now, unlike Game & Watch, they wanted a handheld system that would allow you to swap out games. They began researching the new dot matrix screen technology from Sharp, and right away, they knew these dot matrix displays, they seemed to be the way to go. They even codenamed the project Dot Matrix Game, or DMG. And the Game Boy's official model number, well, it was DMG-01. Now, Yokoi was a fan of what he called lateral thinking with withered technology. Now, what that was a philosophy which pushed aside cutting-edge technology in favor of finding innovative uses for more mature tech. What this means is that things are often more affordable and more durable and reliable. Yokoi's assistant director, Satoru Okada, well, he wasn't quite into the same idea as Yokoi. He believed that while some of Yokoi's ideas were sound, that they still needed a more powerful system, a portable NES, as it were. It's reported that there was a lot of arguing, maybe even a little bit of yelling back and forth, but eventually the two did sort of reach an understanding. All right, so some real mild technical stuff, but I'm going to tell you this for a reason. They ended up using a Sharp CPU. I tell you this because the CPU had a built-in communication feature. Okada had worked on an earlier project called Computer Mahjong Yakumen, which offered multiplayer playability via a cable connection between two devices. Right away, he saw potential with this for this new console. Now, others were skeptical, but alas, he held his ground and personally developed the Game Link cable technology. Now, that meant you could use a cable and connect two Game Boys and play multiplayer games, which was kind of a big deal, especially later on with games like the Pokemon series, but we'll get there in a second. Now, Game Boy also kept the Game & Watch D-pad, which replaced the standard joystick idea and just made sense on a handheld device. The display screens for the Game Boy were developed by Sharp, and originally a color screen option was considered, but the team rejected color due to higher power consumption and higher cost, opting for a simple grayscale screen without a backlight. This was a blessing, and for those of us who love the Game Boy, a curse at times. It was a blessing because it allowed for way more battery life than other handheld devices, but it was a curse because it was a little tough to see in certain lights, and if it was dark, you might as well just forget it. You weren't going to see the thing at all. I mean, you could add light, a peripheral light, which we all did. I mean, you had to if you had a Game Boy. I do want to say that Nintendo actually kind of did the company Citizen a little dirty in the whole display screen thing. You see, Citizen was originally in discussion to make the screens, but through some double dealing and we'll say Mild deception, Sharp was chosen instead. Citizen ended up moving to Sega and worked on their Game Gear. Funny thing is, Sharp, well, they weren't at all prepared to make the screens, and the early versions did not impress the Nintendo team. This actually led to delays, and those delays, along with crappy early versions of the screens, well, that ended up getting the entire project canceled and most of the R&D team reassigned. Now, that could have been it for the Game Boy, but luckily, Yokoi, well, he still had a vision, and he kept working at it on his own. He learned that Sharp was working on a secret project, a super twisted pneumatic, or STN display. Now, this new screen had a green tint and slightly lower contrast. It dramatically improved the viewing angle, though, and Yokoi believed it would save his project. It took him 3 months, but finally he convinced the higher-ups to approve the Game Boy for sale. Have you ever wondered about the size of the Game Boy, like the overall, why it's kind of bulky compared to the screen? No? Well, I mean, honestly, I hadn't really either, but I did some research and I'm going to tell you about it anyway. See, the whole screen debacle made the product price go up, and as a way to fix that, they made the screen smaller. The thing is, the system itself was too far along in development to change its specs, which might have something to do with a screen space that looks like it could possibly fit a larger screen, because it was supposed to. Anyway, Nintendo, they slapped some batteries and a set of headphones into the box, and they send the Game Boy off to the market, and it flopped. I'm just kidding. It sold out within 2 weeks. It launched on April 21st, 1989, and by August, they had sold like 720,000 units and nearly 2 million games of the 4 launch titles. Those titles being Super Mario Land, Baseball, Yakumen, and Alleyway. Well, in Japan. When it launched in the US, the Yakuman was taken away and tennis was added. And of course, Tetris. We all remember Tetris. Tetris was the game the American systems actually came with, and pretty much everywhere came with besides Japan. The Japanese version came with Super Mario Land. It's kind of a bummer, that we didn't get Super Mario Land, but Tetris was huge, and the thought process at the time was that Mario was kind of geared towards boys, and Tetris, in kids, and Tetris could be anyone. And it worked, and Tetris was a huge hit, so. When the Game Boy landed in the US in July, it cost you around $89.95, which in today's money is around $250. And that could have hurt it, but it didn't. On the day it released, 40,000 units were sold, and they hit 1 million within a month. By 1992, the Game Boy units had sold around 10 million units, so sales were strong thanks to titles like Pokemon. The thing is, those strong sales, well, they made Nintendo a little hesitant to upgrade to anything new. If it's not broke, why fix it? It took almost 6 years before any other version would hit the market, and when it did, it was just the Play It Loud version, which were just Game Boys with different colored cases. There was red, yellow, green, blue, black, white, and clear. It was the 90s. We loved clear stuff, as you can see from some of these images. By the way, that came out in 1995. In 1996, we got the Game Boy Pocket. This one offered a better screen, faster response time, a much slimmer console, and only required 2 AAA batteries as opposed to 3 AA batteries. It also cost less, coming in at $69.99. The new screen did cut back on battery life, though, like a lot. And a year later, they would release a $55 version with the old screen, giving you a couple more hours of battery time. Japan would release the Game Boy Light in 1998, although we never received it here in the US. Kind of a bummer, really, as it offered better battery life and a backlit screen. Oh my God, a backlit screen would have been great. Also released in 1998 was the Game Boy Color. Game Boy Color featured a color TFT screen instead of monochrome. It also had a CPU running up to twice the speed and 4 times as much memory as the original. 3 years later, we had the Game Boy Advance, which is one of my favorite handheld systems ever. Game Boy Advance was a 32-bit console, and since the SNES is like my favorite home console ever, it sort of makes sense that the Game Boy Advance is my favorite handheld console. Hey guys, you know something else you can do with your hands? Don't be weird. You can go down and you can click the subscribe button. It would actually be awesome if you did that. I would really appreciate it. It helps out a lot. I know we've been growing a ton lately, and I thank all of you guys for that. We've had a lot of feedback. We've had a lot of likes. By the way, likes, you can hit thumbs up, and that also helps the show a lot. Anyway, guys, if you have like 2 seconds, I'd appreciate you doing that. That's it. We're gonna stop asking right now, and we're gonna go back to the show. So games for the Game Boy were called Game Boy Game Packs, and they're still one of my favorite cartridges out there today. Probably for nostalgia reasons, but I mean, come on, they kind of look like little NES cartridges, which is kind of cool. Over 1,000 games would end up being produced, and over 300 of those would actually be forward compatible with the Game Boy Color. Of course, the biggest title would be, I'm going to give you guys a second to guess. Got it locked in? All right. Pokemon. Pokemon games have always been the big hitters when it came to the Game Boy. Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue, Pokemon Yellow. They were the first installments of the Pokemon video game series, and they sold more than 46 million copies. People still play these today. They're like some of the most beloved Game Boy games out there. Now, there is one more thing I want to mention before we take off for today, and that is the Super Game Boy. Released in 1994, the Super Game Boy was a SNES-sized cartridge that actually allowed you to plug in a Game Boy game and then play them through the SNES on your TV. Now, maybe you're asking yourself, why would I want to do that? I mean, I owned one. I wanted to do that. The thing is, there were exclusive titles that you could only play on the Game Boy, so with the Super Game Boy, you could now play those on your TV using your SNES gamepads. Also, some of the games had added features when you put them on the Super Game Boy. So there were certain Game Boy games that when you played it through the Super Game Boy, you actually got additional features. So they did kind of make it worth your while. Look, the Game Boy destroyed its competitors. It roasted systems like Sega Game Gear and Atari Lynx, which is saying a lot. I mean, those systems were in color, they had overall better graphics, and they were really cool. And yet Nintendo, they understood its market in ways other guys just didn't at the time. They understood that when it came to handhelds, what you wanted was more playtime, more titles. It's cool to have the graphics, but we had that at home. We want to be able to play for hours on end. We want to take this thing on a long car ride and not have to change the batteries 12 times. So that's it, guys. A little bit about the Game Boy. Let me know down in the comments, what was your favorite handheld? Are you a fan of the Game Boy? Tell me in the comments. Let me know down below. Maybe you collect them today. Maybe you still currently have one. Do you have a favorite Game Boy? Just let me know in the comments. Guys, I appreciate you. As always, thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us here on Rewind Toys. And remember, when it comes to these cool handheld toy devices, the hunt, still half the fun.